So this we can think as data governance. And so I have mentioned the 5 layers on the left side, and what I have mentioned on the right side are not the firm or actual thing. These are just indicative to give an idea. Like if we talk of policies for data governance, so these could include statutory data minimization or purpose limitation policies, clearly assigned data governance accountabilities. Uh, when we talk of standards, we could have data set documentation standards or security baselines for assess control, for assessment process. So like this, we can have all these things at different layers. So these are just indicative. Like we could have representational balance metrics at data set level. So all those things can build trust when we talk of data governance. And then we come to the third life cycle stage, which is model governance. So in model again, if we think of what policies could be there, so just an indicative aspect that we could have mandatory AI model risk categorization policy. We could have policy defined intended use and deployment boundaries. If we think of standards, so standardized model evaluation framework, like it could be performance, reliability, fairness or bias assessments could be there. Robustness and resilience benchmarking requirements should be standardized. What actually is robustness? Like again, if we come back to telecom, so in telecom, robustness could be different. But if we think of the medical application, the robustness requirements could be very different. So these have to be very clearly articulated and standardized so that the interpretation is not different between two individuals or two companies. If we talk of assessment processes, then we could have assessment fairness testing across protected attributes, what the TC standard is also proposing. Adversarial stress testing protocols, then tools could be like, we could have different matrices also which are standardized. So we have so many different matrices and which is good, like different matrices for different purposes, but also we need some kind of standardization, like at the higher level, combined metrics, which are agnostic of the metrics used at the lower level, but still like comparable, like some product tested in one organization, another product tested in some other organization, using different matrices, but still the end result is that we can compare them and say, okay, they are relatively ranked in this manner. I hope I still have to think about it. So, and then for compliance, we could have model assessment reports, third-party validation of certification. So all this would be helpful in building trust also. And if we are having some kind of voluntary certification, then for startups, especially like yours and other startup companies, MSMEs, they cannot compete with big tech. So if they have some kind of voluntary certification, that gives authenticity to their products also. So if we talk of, say, again coming back to the fairness example, and we have a standard in TC or TC standards, it also has the assessment product procedure tested a tool Nispaksh also on AI fairness assessment. So if we have a mandate to that our product should be fair, now we have the standard, also the assessment process, also a standard tool compliant to that standard. So we have all the four requirements at the top level, and we also have the combined bias index and fairness score for combined agnostic of the lower level metric process. So all the four requirements are fulfilled. But there should be an ecosystem, like you go somewhere, get your product certified, not mandatorily, but voluntary. It is in your benefit. No, we are not mandating it. So then the whole ecosystem can be there. Like we have these 5-star ratings for our ACs and fridges. So kind of some kind of rating disclosure. So people know that okay, it is at least we are confident to use it at least for the fairness aspect. Then we come to the last life cycle stage, which includes these two inference and agents, which we can say runtime governance. And this is also very critical because the model is everything fine, perfectly okay when we are launching it, but when we use it, then also a lot of governance is required. And maybe for policy, we can say human oversight requirements could be there, incident reporting frameworks should be there, defined liability pathways are required. Then we say of the standards, then what are the harm probability thresholds? Like thresholds have to be specified for different cases. Agent traceability standards. assessment process could be including standardized drift detection processes, standard AI incident classification. For tools, we could have all these metrics like drift detection metrics and all those things, hallucinations, frequency indicators. And then we could have plans like AI incident disclosure frameworks, examine review mechanisms. So like post-development deployment governance determines whether AI systems remain trusted over a period of time. So if we see like where enterprises typically operate, so most enterprises focus on policies, then security compliance, and then tool experimentation. Most of the time, this is not a generalized statement, but it is like most of the time people or companies lack standardized AI assessment processes or comparable fairness metrics or structured AI incident reporting frameworks and all these things. So like this creates some kind of governance fragmentation. Uh, So full stack responsible AI enterprise could require like every life cycle stage governed across all the 5 layers and with measurable and auditable alignment. So if we can in simple way say that we have policy, standardized assessment, metrics, and then a disclosure. So this is like how to operationalize the techno-legal governance, which is very well articulated in the PSA report also. And just last two slides. So we are very well placed. We are fortunate that in India we have already articulated the techno-legal philosophy in our report. We also have the life cycle framing, which is there in the report itself, and also it appears on the rights anchor. So the most important next step should be the implementation architecture. If enterprises align life cycle and governance layers, India can lead not only in AI deployment, but also in AI governance engineering. And so in the end, I would just simply say that responsible AI is not a policy document. It is not a certification badge. It is not a single technical control. It is a structured alignment across life cycle stages and governance layers. Thank you.
हाँ, एक मिनट में फिर से ट्राई करके आपको बता दूँ। AI समिट। हाँ। कौन सा नाम से बताओ? ठीक है मैं नहीं वो नहीं है। अरे बोलने को कह रहे थे ना। कौन से हाँ वो है फोटो प्रिंट है हाँ लेके आता कौन सा नाम है फोटो
So, thank you, Avinash sir, for setting the context as a keynote speaker. It was a wonderful session, insights drawing from the PSA's report as well. So now with that, we move on to the panel discussion on responsible AI, enterprise adoption of responsible AI challenges, frameworks, and solutions. So for that, we have Rajshekhar, who's an AI regulation fellow from iSpirit Foundation. And we have Vibhav Mittal, who's the associate partner with Anand and Anand. And we have Dr. Geeta Raju, who's from senior policy analyst with Sarai IIT Madras. And we have Dr. Subodh Sharma, associate professor of CSE from IIT Delhi. And myself, Suresh Venkatachari, who's the VP of Growth and Community from Private APN. So we'll be the panel for this particular one. So the panel discussion will start about 25 minutes, and I would hand it over to Raj for moderating this session.
Thanks, Suresh. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rajshekhar. I'm an AI regulation fellow at the iSpirit Foundation, a think and do tank that has long championed India's digital public infrastructure story. Welcome to the panel on enterprise adoption of responsible AI. Today's conversation focuses squarely on scope. What does it take for enterprises to move from rhetoric to real-world implementation of responsible AI adoption at scale? We are at an inflection point as we speak. 5 years ago, AI trust and safety were not central boardroom priorities, as we all know, for most organizations dabbling with artificial intelligence. Today, if you look around, that has changed dramatically. Responsible AI has moved from the margins to mainstream, so much so that safety and trust are at the epicenter of this Impact Summit. So let me begin with a common question to all our speakers here. What do you think has changed? What do you see as the single most decisive incentive for enterprises across the board that is driving them to integrate safety into their technical operations? I think we can start with Suresh.
Thank you, Raj. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. So, if you look at it from a responsible AI perspective for the organization, the single most important thing is to have a trustworthy AI. So, when you look at it, the trustworthy AI is something which helps the organizations to mitigate risk from an enterprise risk perspective. In case an organization does not adhere to these responsible AI principles and implement it in the right way, the organizations are liable to have certain regulatory risks related to that. So it could be penalties, it could be some kind of fines or warnings and things like that. And also it could be certain financial risk associated with something, and also reputational risk to the organization in terms of the organization's reputation could be tarnished in terms of the principles not being adopted and so on. So it becomes all the more important for an organization to ensure that they implement a responsible AI framework. And as Avinash just mentioned, in terms of the life cycle of the entire AI, it's at one stage, the entire 5 stages of the AI life cycle. In fact, it's been mentioned in the BSA's report also. So I think the controls have to be there at all 5 stages. So adequate technical controls have to be put in place so that you implement it right at the data collection stage, and of course during the model training and all those things. So the different life cycle of AI, I think we need to implement those controls.
Subodh?
9918 00 7860.
I think the answer to that question lies in the keyword responsible AI. And as Roshanji already pointed out, and Avinash ji in his talk earlier, that you require trustworthy AI to be implemented in order to move towards providing this responsible AI framework. Now, for enterprise adoption, I think the biggest pain point is the cost of implementing safety and compliance layers. And that cost has to be lower than the cost of possible harm that could come out without having these technology interventions in place. So cost is a big driver, and that essentially prioritizes that moving towards trustworthy AI. What is it that, as designers, as technology architects, we should be thinking about? Now, there are a lot of terms that flow into that are being discussed in this landscape. As a part of trustworthy AI, people are talking about explainability. And it's a higher order semantic task in the sense that there's a lot of computation and there's a lot of complexity that has to be brought in to essentially enable an AI system to be explainable. And the question in front of us is that is it going to be cost effective or it will be adoption? Trust is indeed important, but what are those basic building blocks that we could start with, which are cost effective and yet could scale at population level? And therein, I think we have some. My request for everyone's consideration would be to start talking about immutable evidences. Can these immutable evidences be recorded extremely cheap? Because storage at the end of the day is extremely cheap. Petabytes of storage at a system. Start storing logs, which could be publicly auditable, or could be auditable by regulatory agencies or not. But these logs have to be, in order to engender trust, it is very important that these logs are sort of immutable. Why? Because that gives a sense to the user that even though those logs are residing with service providers, these service providers as system privilege system administrators have no control to go back in time and fiddle around that. That immutable evidence is the first chief building block towards moving into this direction of trustworthy. And I think the second low-hanging fruit, I would say, would be collecting some sort of a incidence repository, because that essentially creates enough framework for the entire community to rise up. Because everybody is talking about the incidences that they have come across, and it need not be out there in the public domain with all the details. It could very well be anonymous. You have the technology that at scale could anonymize data and can put it out for community's advantage. In that sense, it essentially becomes a digital public good. But until as these things, cheap building blocks are sort of thought of, we move to self-talk.
Excellent. No, I will come back to you, to elucidate further, the integration between DPI and AI. But from what I understand is that the enabling ecosystem for responsible AI adoption is becoming more favorable, and it's evolving rapidly. Geeta, same key question to you as well. Like, what do you think is the single most important decisive incentive for enterprises to do AI responsibly?
So when we think from an enterprise perspective, the number of research works that is going on in the sector. Say for healthcare, you see a lot of advancements, a lot of AI work is being developed as part of so when we see it from the enterprise adoption perspective, from each of the sectors, right? So say for healthcare, we have a lot of AI models that are getting developed each and every day. But how much of it is being scaled up and adopted? So how do we build trust in from the low level? Right? So from the end user level, we need some certain kind of socio-technical assessments to be done so that it can be adopted on ground and be scaled up. So what kind of metrics should they want to use? And how do they understand that these are all the risks that can come up when they adopt it in real time, right? So when I actually start developing a product, we will actually think about certain kinds of risks that we can anticipate and then come up with a risk appetite from the organization perspective. But I don't think that will be the exhaustive list of risks that can happen in real time. So as Sir said, we need to have a cross-domain, cross-platform incident reporting mechanism which will enable people to report incidents and might be not a centralized database, but in terms of a federated system which can be accessed by multiple people, multiple sectors, by multiple regulators to understand what is the impact that all these AI systems has made from the human perspective, right? So usually organizations will always think about revenues, think about the market stability, and how do they actually come up with some new business, right? But how do we make sure that there is some ethical values integrated into all these adoptions? And the most prominent incentive that I feel is that government should come up with some voluntary commitment and self-regulation things which will enable organizations to disclose certain things. So that, say, if I'm an organization adopting an AI system in healthcare perspective, I will disclose certain risks to public, saying that these are all the potential risks which people will face, so that people are still aware of certain risks and stay back when certain things happen in their life. Right? So those kind of assessments and awareness should be enabled through different stakeholders who are involved in adopting AI systems.
Sure. Vibhav?
Excellent discussion. I'm going to answer that question, Raj. My name is Vibhav Mittal. I'm an IP lawyer who's transitioned to governance. So I bring in a non-technical and sort of a legal and governance lens to this conversation. I'm actually going to answer that question by stepping back, stepping with, and stepping one step ahead of what my co-panelists have said so far. Step back. Your question assumes what's my incentive for responsible AI implementation. This question assumes that we have identified the business use case for which we want to use AI. So that's the foundation pillar of this question, right? Responsible AI can't happen if I don't know what I want to use it for. The second assumption that flows when we're talking about responsible AI is that we're also clear about which type of AI are we talking about. Are we talking about fine-tuning generative AI models and building AI applications? Are we in a 2018, 2019 era where AI is just doing pattern recognition like healthcare and financial space? Or am I building a foundation model? So both these two aspects. So there's a context of AI type, and there's when we talk about I know which model and which AI use case I've chosen, then we've gone into separate sectors, separate use cases, and there's a lot of context. Now, once you've established that context, I think I would like to give a different spin. So a lot of my co-panelists have spoken about the incentive, right? So incentive, I can just cite a study, right? The Harvard Business Review published a study in March 2025 about a financial-based lending app, which included responsible AI by design. There were 5 features. 3 features they included in this financial-based pension-based app, which was understandability, auditability, and privacy. And they surveyed about, I think, 3,000 respondents. And the minute understandability, auditability, and privacy was incorporated in the AI product, adoption went up 60%. So there's the incentive. But I do want to, because in our previous discussion before we entered this room, was also what are the bottlenecks. I kind of want to focus on the bottlenecks for 1 second here.
We will come to that in the next line of questions.
Okay, good. So then I think that would be my sort of thing. That it helps you approach AI holistically.
Absolutely, brilliant. I think when it comes to a safe and trusted AI, the business case for safe and trusted AI is increasingly becoming apparent to industry stakeholders across the board. I think that's a major shift that we are all witnessing in the ecosystem. Moving swiftly on to the next segment of the panel, I'll be throwing some specific questions to each of you. As we know, right, I think Subodh spoke about it, and Geeta, you as well. The regulatory landscapes, right, are actually evolving at a breakneck pace. Compliance is increasingly complex, costly, and the line between mandatory and voluntary compliance is blurring, right? Against this backdrop, Suresh, can I bring you in? Let's start with cross-border reality, right? So companies today are building once and deploying everywhere globally. How should organizations think about navigating global regulatory fragmentation in AI safety without slowing innovation or hurting commercial viability?
Yeah. So in terms of an organization's use cases that we were talking about, right? So of course, businesses can do better when they use AI, and we're able to reap the benefits of use of AI. But at the same time, when an organization is building it somewhere and deploying it elsewhere across the globe, there are multiple regulatory requirements that come in. For example, if you're talking about the EU, the thing is when you're talking about AI, you cannot leak data because data becomes a fundamental part of AI. So when you're talking about it, again, personal data comes into picture, the data protection laws of each geography comes into picture. So you need to be aware of that. And if you look at EU, the EU AI Act is there. In India, if you look at it, the DPDPA is there, so on. So given that kind of a different things, the organization first need to look at the various regulatory requirements that are there in the geographies in which they are operating and deploying these particular AI systems. So you need to have an idea about the regulatory requirements, and the best way to do that is to map the regulatory requirements of each country and try to see what are the differences of requirement between country A to country B or geography A to geography B, and then try to set a common baseline which we can implement across the globe. So the minimum common baseline should be there across the globe. And then for each geography, you can look at how the data can be managed. And that is one way where you kind of mitigate the risk, because while you're trying to implement AI, and try to go at a breakneck speed, you might also end up not fulfilling some of the regulatory obligations. So to ensure that we are doing things right, so of course we need to take care of things. So when you're looking at it from a model training perspective or a model inference perspective, so definitely technical controls play an important role. And of course, I'm not going to steal the limelight of Abhilash's presentation, which is going to come forward next. But definitely, when you look at it from a model training perspective, you use machine learning and other things and try to make sure that you train the model appropriately and then use it. And when you look at it from an inference perspective, ensure that the model is doing what it is supposed to do, whether it's going to be giving out decisions or whether it's going to be adhering to certain processing requirements or whatever. So ultimately, we need to ensure that the model is behaving in the right way. So which means you can do technical things like red teaming and those kind of things, AI red teaming, and you can do other assessments, AI risk assessments and so on, to make sure that you have built the model the way in which it's supposed to be used and it doesn't create a risk that you're not foreseeing. So I think I would put it that way.
Right. Interesting insight and like extremely important. But I think it is here where I can perhaps ask Vibhav chime in. How do we optimize for this? Right? Like let's unpack the legal layer because let's unpack the legal layer because you know that liability regimes are evolving rapidly. Every fortnight there is a new harm that gets recognized in law, right? What specific legal uncertainties do you see are holding back enterprises when they think about responsible AI implementation?
That's an excellent question. So, the short answer to that is that responsible AI is actually law plus. And I'm going to expand that. When we look at responsible AI, let me tell you what it's not. Responsible AI, well, okay, hold on. So, making AI responsible or holding harm from AI systems and holding people liable from harm from AI systems is a part of responsible AI. What we have to think of responsible AI is actually thinking in terms of features that you want in your AI systems or services. And that which feature is important for an enterprise, and that is tied to which sector you operate in, which customer you interact with. Is privacy an important feature? Is explainability an important feature? Is transparency an important feature? Is safety? And then in safety, is it foundation model, frontier model safety? Or is it accountability? Then when you look at accountability, we're coming back to laws, when we look at the responsible AI landscape, it actually, and the solution lies in this framing. Accountability, the way we traditionally understand law, that there's a rules-based approach, someone did a harm, someone's held liable. Yes, that is part of responsible AI. You have adverse incidents and you use laws to address that. You have intellectual property laws, you have data protection laws, consumer protection laws, information technology laws in India, all applying to that. But there's another piece to responsible AI and the legal compliance part, which is one, you're not thinking about features that we spoke about. And then when you think about features, tying back to what Avinash ji spoke about, right, the life cycle thinking, right? You have to talk and think about risk mitigation across the AI life cycle. And when you think of risk mitigation across the AI life cycle, what does life cycle mean? It means that if I'm building an AI application, fine-tuned with generative AI model, what stage one, when I conceived it? Stage two, when data in use. Stage 3, when I'm actually putting the model in, sort of building the model. Stage 4, when it's out there and I'm getting real input of how it's operating. Right? So that's how we have to think. We have to think of life cycle. We have to think of law as a part, and then we have to think of the plus. And a very short answer, what is that plus? Right? When we talk about plus, if you look at the Indian governance guidelines, Annex 5 or Annex 4 actually cite relevant voluntary frameworks for India that help in implementing responsibly. And what are those voluntary frameworks? They get divided into three, four parts. One is TEC standards, which TEC, like fairness standards. Second, ISO standard.
देखता हूँ
Third, audits. Fourth, voluntary frameworks. So when we look at standards, there are non-technical standards about sort of integrating AI and an AI management system. And then we look at frameworks, we have risk mitigation across the life cycle. So the short point being, organizations have to think of the feature, think of the life cycle, think of who they are as an actor, and embed risk across the design of their AI product. And that's how you achieve the compliance
Super.
space.
I think voluntary standards and frameworks have an excruciatingly important role to play when it comes to responsible AI implementation. Uh, if I can bring you here, I think CRI has been advocating for a global AI safety commons framework, right? Because the cost of compliance, especially for startups and small and medium-sized enterprises that are typically resource crunched, most of them can't bear it, right? Why do you think it is important? What do you think should constitute the foundational scope of a safety commons architecture? I think if you can limit your response within 2 minutes or even less than that, that'll be awesome because we are running for time late.
Sure.
Yes.
I'll just start with a very simple example. So, for example, the MIT AI incident reporting tracker, right? So, they have a scale for this classification or severity classification, which says if you're facing a financial loss of more than $1 million, it is actually classified as high severity incidents. So all these kind of classifications are centric towards the western region of the world, right? So how do we make it contextualized to the Indian environment? All these socio-cultural and socio-economic background should be integrated into your assessment campaigns. And that is what we are trying to do, generating or creating safety comments from the perspective of the region-specific things, the domain-specific things, which will enable the assessment of AI models, which is getting deployed at scale. So, for instance, we are trying to assess multilingual, multi-model text, be it audio, video kind of things, towards the assessment of safety. So, what kind of vulnerable things or violent things are present in those content, and how are we going to identify? So, for example, we have certain things that are present in the text but not in the audio. But still, when you combine it together, you will have certain things which will lead to a harmful impact. Right? So, those kind of assessments we are trying to do and come up with an evaluation matrix, which will help us in developing some comments which can be used across the globe. And so, certain things are still contextualized to region, which will be helpful for people who are adopting AI to evaluate it based on things.
Got it. I think we'll be remiss if we are talking about commons framework and not mention DPI. And I think I'll give the closing to Subodh here. Subodh, given our experience in DPI, how can we shape the next 2 to 3 years of technical priorities, especially when it comes to making AI safety measurable, auditable by design? And is there any candidate architecture that you can recommend for potential inclusion in the commons framework that Geeta just spoke about?
Yeah, I think the solution to that question, I'm not all knowing, but from what I can understand is the solution lies in what Avinashji spoke about, what's written in the PSA's report, which is techno-legal governance of AI. When the consumption of AI is going to happen at population scale, how do you ensure that it is behaving in a responsible, trustworthy manner? So that's in where you'll have to start thinking about, can I automate or semi-automate the process of analyzing whether this system is behaving according to its intended specification, whatever that specification could be. And that's where you have to start thinking about legality, liability, auditability, provability, explainability, not just as rules written down on paper, but enforceable as machine enforceable as runtime checks or static checks, right? And that could essentially be orchestrated right at before the system is deployed, so at an ex-ante level, or export could be a combination of two. But the real idea is that you have policy implemented as code, and that's the way to go about doing it. I mean, as suggestions, what I would say, which could be segued into what Geeta spoke about. Perhaps I'll go back to the things that I said in my initial remarks. Perhaps looking at low-cost, immutable evidences, some sort of an architecture which has hooks into all stages of the AI pipeline, monitoring it as the system evolves, keeping the evidences for audit, and then having explainable or liability allocation analysis components bootstrap over these evidences.
I think it's as elaborate as it can get. Thank you so much, Subodh, for that brilliant insight. I think we can close the panel now. Thank you all for joining, and thank you to the audience. If we have raised more questions that we have answered, then I think the ecosystem is alive and well.
Yeah. So thank you, Raj. Following the panel discussion, we have a responsibly tech stack presentation by Abhilash. So please stay back for that, and then Abhilash, over to you.
Looking forward to the most interesting part of the session. So request people to stay back. It's going to be whatever we saw now, techno-legal framework. How do we implement it actually on ground is what we are going to see. It's one of its kind, first of its kind, privacy and responsibility framework. If you can have the slides on the screen. So let us say, okay. So we are a company called Privacypien. We are sure. Yeah, we are a company called Privacypien. We are world's first full-stack responsibility platform, covering all the stages mentioned by PSA's paper across data collection, data use protection, AI risk assessment, inline protection. Yeah, inline protection. Can you hear me at the last? Okay. Okay. Now is it better? Okay. So how do you build this? How do you implement it? Think that you are a bank. Right? We have been working with global organizations like IEEE. We are actually in Paris by India, Saudi Arabia government, Accenture, and across multiple entities across. So why, what, and how? First, why? Why is this very important for enterprises? Think that you are a bank, right? You have to deploy AI responsibly. Why? So if you put privacy, think of Apple, right? The first thing they advertise is Apple with a lock, right? So if you put privacy at the center and responsibility at the center, people will believe in you and give more data. When you give more data, you can build more intelligence. And when you build more intelligence, you can create more value. And if you create more value, it's a positive vicious cycle. This is very foundational for every business unit, and we are not speaking philanthropy, right? So it's actual business, but how can responsible accelerate your business is what we are speaking about. Now, in this, these are things that you have today, right? So the ones which are in white, for example, you have the compute infra, you have LLMs, and you are building agents, right? What is missing is understanding the risk, mitigating the risk for data in-use protection, AI risk assessment, safety, and security. When you build this, your stack is complete. So how do you do it? This is the whole life cycle that is mentioned by the PSA paper, and this is globally first of its kind that India is putting out. Responsible AI framework, which is much broader, better than EU's AI impact, EU Act, right? So the data collection, there are different phases in the life cycle. At the data collection level, let us say you're a bank, you are building a model for loan approvals, right? Can you take people's loan approval documents and directly train the model? You will have their health information, sensitive information, their financial value. Your kid is studying all information. Can they use it and train the model? Right? At the data collection level, you have to understand the risk in the data. Then at the data in-use level, you have to mitigate. For example, you have to do anonymization, pseudonymization, differential privacy, different kinds of techniques. These are techniques that the big techs are using, but this has to be democratized for all enterprises, which is very foundational, right? Once that is done, once you build a model such, let us say you have built on top of Gemini or Llama, you built a model. How do you validate that after you have trained the model, the guardrails are not broken, right? It's very foundational. So you do an assessment of the model and quantify the risk in the parameters that are important for you, right? That's the model training part. And once you deploy it, there can be new kinds of attacks which are coming up, right? Which can breach your guardrails and extract sensitive information out of your model. Or users, for example, let's say you're a bank and your bank employees are putting loan approval requirements directly to an LLM which is external to your ecosystem, right? Which will breach your fundamental requirements. So during inference, how do you protect at the user level, at the model level? It becomes foundational. Then agentic brings a completely different dimension of obligations, because agents can hallucinate, and hallucination can result in any of these risks of privacy, safety, security. It may think of ordering pizza, then end up ordering a bomb, right? It may hallucinate and do different things. So when you are allowing it to do things in the real world, it is exponential risk than an LLM, which is just a chatbot, right? So this is the why part of it. On the what part of it, this is what I think Professor also mentioned earlier, so I'm not going to discuss more. But these are the stages of the life cycle. So why humanities? Tomorrow, the human rights have to be protected against the models. You want to be a algo slave, or you want to be human holding your consciousness, is the question, right? So hence, the human civil rights are very foundational. On how do you convert these civil rights into technical requirements, which is privacy, safety, security, fairness, and what is the quality of these requirements? How do you make it explainable, transparent, provable, and enabling? It's going to be foundational, and this will be mapped to different stages of your life cycle, right? This is how we are doing it, and there are some very foundational principles. For example, what is the difference between security and privacy? Security is data at rest and transit, while privacy is data in use. And most of the security architects are experts here. You would know the CAA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. But from a privacy perspective, the similar triad is called dissociability, predictability, and manageability. How do you dissociate data before using it for, let us say, model training, right? We discussed about the loan application use case. How do you dissociate the user from the data and then use it for model training, right? That's pretty critical requirement, and AI is a classical example of data in use. So how do you ensure protection of data in use is the fundamental question that you have to ask. Now that's the why part. How part? Happy to introduce you Privacy Inspired platform. We are launching a couple of new products on this, the whole stack. This is first of its kind globally, having a single stack solutions across the life cycle, right? At the data collection level, how do you quantify the risk, right? From consent, right? Without consent, if the data is flowing to an external ecosystem, or without protection across the legal obligation, it becomes a problem. Understanding the risk and quantifying the risk and doing AI impact assessment at data level, or data protection impact assessment, which is a legal obligation in DPA, right? Followed by technical safeguards, includes anonymization, like mathematical grade anonymization, like K anonymity, T closeness, differential privacy, synthetic data with differential privacy. These are foundational for you to get exemption to use your data in the model training process. Followed by a assessment where you have AI impact assessment done, and you do red teaming on the data. For example, an agent doing an interview of a model before you deploying a model. So the agent will ask the model questions on various aspects of privacy, safety, security, and fairness, and quantify the risk. Right? Similarly, at the inference level, how do you put a firewall around the model, both at the user level and at the model level, and protect the model from both these dimensions of sensitive information reaching the AI ecosystem, similarly preventing attack reaching the ecosystem, and ensuring that the model does not pass out sensitive information to downstream parties. Right? Then subsequently, the most recent layer, which we are also launching today, is the agentic trusted ecosystem, where we are working with Massachusetts Institute of Technology in building in a Nanda ecosystem. We are working on building protocols and standards for trusted agents. Like the traditional world, we are getting in the internet era, we are getting into internet of agents. And in internet of agents, like DNS, we need to have protection and control for agents as well. Can you have like something like DNS for agents? How do you quantify it? How do you list it? Like yellow pages, right? How do you list it? And how do you control agent from hallucinating? Especially now it gets into the hallucination control. How do you build contextual based hallucination control at the agent level is what we are doing. That quickly covers the whole spectrum. So we are happy to announce that we have built first of its kind privacy threat modeling globally. We have built first of its kind unified privacy enhancing technology platform, agentic AI red teaming, small language models, including pseudonymous inference, and agentic DPIA with contextual boundary. So this is what broadly we do. And these are some of the visualizations, because we have to move forward beyond from text to action, which is all about the impact summit, right? So how do you capture consent? How do you capture the data flow in the ecosystem, right? With different multiple downstream parties, and how do you quantify risk? Like Professor was speaking earlier. How do you quantify risk at privacy, safety, security, fairness methods? And then how do you do it for structured and unstructured data? Then how do you do interaction like agentic DPAA interacting with your DPO or your business user requesting for data, followed by mathematical proofs of, let's say, K anonymity, T closeness, differential privacy when you are feeding data, because this is going to be critical for your transparency. Followed by synthetic data with differential privacy, that the utility of the data becomes a proof. I'm created as synthetic data, but does it have the same utility as the original data? It's a fundamental question. You need to have mathematical proofs of it to even take it to your business data analytics team. Followed by red teaming. How do you quantify risk, compare it against other models, against privacy, safety, and other attributes that you want in your business context? Then followed by inline inference. Like how do you put a firewall between, let us say, Claude and Gemma, between your end user, so that it can identify the risk at the prompt level and the RAG level? How do you protect security at prompt and RAG and interact with the external downstream model, right? And across the life cycle, how do you do it? And especially on the agentic side, right? So agents have a couple of two folks. One is at the LLM side and one is at the API side. So on both sides, how do you control the flow? What information can flow and what information cannot flow? And how do you build contextual boundaries around it, right? This is going to be the definition of responsible AI technically in the future. And this is not a cost center as we were discussing, and this is a fundamental problem, right? This is a profit center, because as you unlock data, you can't even touch data today. For example, healthcare data or financial data, you can't even touch it. And without it, the model is useless. It gives you insight which are purposeless. But if you unlock the data, then you can take the data for model training, then your model can become gold, right? And this is what is going to change the world in terms of responsible AI, enterprise AI adoption. This is going to be foundational, other than very different from the traditional my child drawing cartoons with OpenAI. Right? That is very different. For enterprises, you need to have models on-prem, and that has to be speaking your language with your data. And for that, responsible AI is critical. And this is going to change the way the world is going to use AI. Right? As an analogy, like when the internet came, we all were using blogs. But after that, when it was digital banking, it was a very different ballgame than putting a blog. Right? Same is going to be the difference between normal responsible AI and enterprise responsible AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhilash, for that presentation on the platform. So I would request Ujjwal to come over to hand over the mementos from India. I request the speakers to be here for a minute. So thank you everyone, for the audience, for being here and listening to us. Thank you so much.
वो अभी फोटो लेंगे जहाँ मर्जी वहाँ चला नहीं